Hi, I'm Linda Mall, and welcome to Art This Week Bio's Valley House Gallery. This is episode 1 in a series of interviews we did on the history of Valley House Gallery and Sculpture Garden. Here we speak with gallery president Kevin Vogel about his father Donald, who started the gallery, the origins of the gallery in the mid-1950s, and some of the important early exhibitions. Now for our interview with Kevin. So prior to your father first opening the gallery with Betty McLean, what connections to the DFW art scene did he have?
Well, he came to Dallas in 1942 with the idea of, because he was primarily a painter, he came to sort of open up a new chapter in his life, really. He'd been in Chicago, he was tired of Chicago, and he wanted to go to a place that he thought he could be part of what was happening in the art scene. And Dallas, being fairly young in the arts at that time, as far as the development and where they were, this gave him an opportunity to be part of the scene, so to speak, and contribute in some way. So he came in '42, and during that time frame, he integrated himself as best as possible into the Dallas art scene. He actually worked for a period of time at the Dallas Little Theater, which was actually quite famous at the time, and he worked putting sets together. He often told me that he would have a budget of $5 to put a set together, and somehow managed. Every once in a while, I think he actually walked on stage. But met my mother in Fort Worth because he was very involved with the Fort Worth artists. The Dallas artists at the time he didn't really have much communication with, didn't get along with them, frankly, because his view was more international in scope, and the Dallas group had really switched more into a regionalist mode. And he really wasn't interested in that. And the Fort Worth artists were far more open and more interested in what was going on in the world, in Europe, in New York. And so he integrated himself more. Even though he lived in Dallas, he really integrated himself with the Fort Worth artists, and ended up meeting my mother in Fort Worth, actually, at the Dixon Reeder House and school. And they lived on a property over near, I guess, Lover's Lane, and where Exchange Park is today. That's where Frito-Lay originally moved in. And he was a painter and had always been a painter. Consequently, that's how he was making his living. And that's essentially what he had been doing up until the time he worked with Betty McLean, opening up the Betty McLean Gallery.
What did he learn from his time with the Betty McLean Gallery, and how did it affect his experience with the Valley House Gallery?
Well, actually, that experience was amazing in that because Betty McLean had extraordinary contacts during that time frame, because she essentially was involved with the art world pretty much her entire life, and she knew a lot of the people in New York, the dealers in New York, and she knew a lot of the dealers and people very involved in the art world in Europe. And friends of hers were essentially the people who inherited the Vollard estate. Ambrose Vollard was a dealer in France, and he was the dealer for Picasso, dealer for Brock. He also was very involved, along with Cornweiler, in dealing with those people, but he also dealt in the French Impressionists. So anything from French Impressionism up through the moderns, in the Paris moderns, basically getting into the School of Paris. Those artists were involved with the Vollard estate, and because of that, it opened up the door to that estate. In fact, later on, it allowed Valley House, the sort of evolution of the Betty McLean Gallery. It allowed Valley House access into this estate to get works that other dealers did not have access to. And in actuality, it wasn't that they didn't have access, it was more that he didn't have to actually buy the work. The work, he could actually get it on consignment. And that was huge, because he was able to put amazing exhibitions because of that, together because of that. The other thing that it did is, in that time frame, New York desperately wanted to make inroads into the Dallas art scene, and Texas art scene for that matter. So they were very interested in helping a gallery out any way they could by supplying major works, helping my father and mother put exhibitions together that would will actually be sort of landmark shows in those early years. The start of the gallery actually is kind of unusual in that my father and mother had just had a new child, 1950, and that was my brother Eric, who is 5 years older than I am. And they had invited Betty over to see the new baby. And Betty came in, and she had a friend with her, and the friends, when they came to visit, they were oohing and aahing over the new child, of course. And in the conversation that ensued, Betty was talking about maybe doing something, opening up a business, maybe a boutique for ladies or something in that direction. And at least the way my father tells the story is that he looked at Betty, who he knew was very involved in the art world, and said, "Betty, what Dallas needs is a first-rate modern art gallery." And she basically said, "I think you're absolutely right, let's do it." So Betty was the money behind the gallery, and my father was the director of the gallery, and my mother actually worked as an assistant to Betty, sort of as a secretary. And so that's how the gallery got started. The question of why they chose the location of the gallery, it was because they had actually done some research, is my understanding, and that was very rare for my father getting involved in something like that. That's probably something that Betty's husband probably recommended they do, because he was in oil and real estate and knew the ropes in that direction. So they found out that there were more millionaires per square mile in that particular area of far north Dallas than just about anywhere else in the world at that point, or at least in this part of Texas. And consequently, they decided that that would be a good place. And that was at the edge of Dallas at the time. There was Northwest Highway had gone in, a new shopping center had gone in, which was called Preston Center, essentially. And they became the second business in Preston Center after the cafeteria was in. Because they were located in sort of the major developments that were going in around Preston Hollow and developments like that, they wanted to be where the people who could afford art would end up. And Highland Park south of them, and what was developing north, it just made sense to be in that location. They did some amazing shows in that time frame. That's like a 4-year period. 3.5 years, I guess. And they had shows by Ben Nicholson, Lionel Feininger. They had shows by Morris Graves. They had a full Calder show, including mobiles, stabiles, prints, drawings, and group shows of modern masters. And it was an amazing time for a gallery like that.
With the closing of that Betty McLean Gallery in Preston Center, did he have reservations about opening another gallery, and why so far north?
Well, the so far north question is probably what I need to answer first. He had the property on Lover's Lane, or just off of Lover's Lane, and other people wanted that property badly. And he was thinking about doing what Valley House is today. He had hoped to do in that location, which was much further into town, much easier to get to for people. And basically what it boiled down to, they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And because of that, this is going to be 53, so the Betty McLean Gallery has another year of operation, even though he comes out to where Valley House is now. And he and my mother drive down a little bumpy two-lane country road, basically, blacktop, which is Hillcrest, and then they get on essentially a caliche road, which is Spring Valley at the time, which dead-ended. So it wasn't a through street at the time. And they found this piece of property, and the piece of property was solidly wooded, and the thing that stopped them was a picnic table. So in actuality, the reason Valley House is here is because of a picnic table that happened to be on the side of the road, totally surrounded by woods, and they thought, what a beautiful space. And they got out and walked all the way through the property to the creek. And on the way back to the Spring Valley itself, there was a lady who owned the property who had come down. There's a farm on the other side of the road, and the lady had seen my parents stop and get out and walk down, and she was very concerned because who are these people walking on my property? So she ran down and demanded to know what they were doing, and my father said, is this property for sale? And she said, for a price. And said, well, how much do you want for it? And she said, $9,500, and my father bought it on the spot. I was born in 55, so 53, 54 we use as the start date of Valley House Gallery. That's after the Betty McLean Gallery closes, and they close, I guess, in September of 54. So the reason we use that as the start date for the gallery itself is I actually found some invoices for framing dated in that time frame. The logo of the unicorn actually is the only thing that was transferred from the Betty McLean Gallery to Valley House Gallery, which we still use as the logo. But it became Valley House and then eventually Valley House Gallery as a term.
So it seems like the gallery was trying to show some very important work, household names now. How did they get access to those works, and did they sell?
Well, as I mentioned, the dealers in New York were very, very interested in Valley House because we were really the only gallery that was doing that sort of thing. Chapman Kelly later on started bringing major works also into the Dallas area, but really my parents were the first people, beyond the Betty McLean Gallery, of course. But when they moved here, they continued that approach, and they did some amazing shows. I mean, you go back to one of the most, I guess the first really major show they did after they moved out here was an exhibition in which they had a large Monet water lily painting, and it was here. My father had it for sale at $100,000 here and couldn't find a buyer for it. That's a lot of money at that time frame, but the painting, when it left here, went immediately to the Cleveland Museum, and I had a wonderful experience about a year ago. I went to Cleveland with an artist we represent, Cedric Huckabee, and I saw that painting in the Cleveland Museum, and it's just stunning. He had an exhibition, and with that exhibition at the same time, the gardens were opened up at Valley House, and the gardens are really quite unique. We've got, at the moment, a little over 4 acres of gardens here, and they were finished in 59 with the idea of an exhibition of work by Charles Umlauf. It was a retrospective exhibition at that time and was the first major sculpture show. After that, there were shows by Bordel. There was probably the culmination of probably a good end point for at least those early days of great exhibitions was the Henri Moore show, and he had over 50 major Moores throughout the property. The other thing that happened that was major for the gallery is, again, because the dealers in New York were fascinated in wanting to have an association with Texas, Valley House became the first gallery in Texas to become part of the Art Dealers Association of America, and that was 19 1964, they formed the organization 2 years earlier. So we felt very honored to be part of that, or I should say my parents felt very honored to be part of that. I was very young at the time. And I think if you ask my father what was the most major thing that happened, or a show that happened, it would have been in that same time frame, actually. And that was an exhibition of paintings, works on paper by Georges Rouault. And that comprised 54 paintings, and the story behind that is really fascinating. That deserves an entire interview, frankly. I wish my father was around that you could interview him on that, because my father knew that this work existed, but really nobody else knew. Certainly the Vollard estate knew. And every time my father would write a letter, he asked about these works, and he kept being put off, saying, well, they really, they don't exist. And my father kept saying, no, they have to exist. I know they exist. And finally one day he got the letter, and he basically was told in the first part of the letter, sit down. And he did. And he was told at that time that he was going to be sent the 54 paintings of the Rouault Passion, and that it was up to him to promote them how he felt appropriate. And he did so, and I think that he would say that was the crowning achievement of what he did as a dealer, because that group of works was astounding, and he did a very good job of introducing them to the world at that early time.
We want to thank Kevin for speaking with us. You can find more information on the gallery at valleyhouse.com. Look for a link below in the show notes for the full interview. Watch for other episodes about Valley House Gallery and Sculpture Garden over the next few weeks. That's it for Art This Week Bios. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid. The thought of you I can't avoid. Sitting